Hi, you. It's me, Nicole Phoenix Star, and this is the Next Star podcast. Well, I wanted to talk today about depression, and it's so funny. It's a funny thing to say. A couple of weeks ago, I had a few people saying that they had this kind of few days where they were feeling depressed. They had this depressed energy. There was this depression clump of time. And I was like, were you depressed? Or were you just experiencing unhappiness? Because I find, like many things in the world, the overuse of words and the generalization of words becomes quite normalized, and people, when they're having a bit of a tough time or whatever, they're like, oh, I'm feeling so depressed. And I'm like, if you look at clinical depression and the definition of depression, it's quite a different thing than having a few bad days or feeling very low. Yeah, having a few bad days, we say, oh, I was so depressed last week, but I'm okay now. Like, it's not a true indication. And I think people really recognize from this normalization low days or sad days or unhappy days and label them as feeling depressed, which I think confuses the mindset. There's some very very clear questions that you get asked by a psychologist or psychiatrist when they're trying to determine whether you're clinically depressed or not, or in a state of depression. And, there's physical things, as well as thought patterns and even health stuff, symptoms, that can be clearly categorized as a depressive state. And I have experienced a level of clinical depression twice in my life. Oh, 3 times actually. The first time that I was diagnosed with depression, I had postnatal depression after my first pregnancy, and it was an absolute different state of mind and being and living, to sad days, unhappy seasons, hard times. It was such a definitive difference. And, it's like treading water and not being able to see land and feeling a sense of absolute hopelessness and helplessness for extended amount of times, and kind of crazy thoughts that are quite startling to you, even. So when I was diagnosed with postnatal depression, I was medicated for about a year and went to a postnatal depression support group. and found that really helpful. And, eventually the fog cleared and the lived experience shifted eventually, and I was able to intentionally come off those meds and continue on with life, which in itself is a whole other getting used to, because you start feeling at the full range that you didn't feel when you're on the meds, which are, kind of blockers that keep you in kind of a more tepid space. I remembered at one stage I was like, I came into this awareness. I'm like, I don't feel any extreme excitement or ecstatic joy or intense emotions, even like, I remembered it came to light to me because something quite horrific happened, and I was like, oh, that's no good to someone. And rather than kind of being deeply affected by this thing, and I was like, what? Why does that kind of feel quite neutralized? And I was like, oh, the meds. And yeah, coming off it is also getting used to and navigating the full range of emotions and feelings of the human experience. And I don't think that is kind of emphasized enough in the coming off medication piece, because it's a really big factor on being able to kind of navigate things out the other side. And then, I don't know, like maybe about 7 years later, I was having a particularly difficult time post marriage separation, and just every area of my life there was like extreme clunkiness, and I found myself kind of in a bit of erratic behavior and feeling not being able to self-regulate. And one day just borrowing my mum's car and kind of driving off into the distance. I didn't get very far, because I had the great insight to call my father, who said, come back and we'll work this out. And he took me to a doctor, and she put me on medication again. And that medication was a lot stronger than the postnatal depression because I was breastfeeding, and so it was a different type of med that allowed to not interfere with my breastfeeding, and I wasn't breastfeeding the second time. Yeah, it was really kind of harsh. And during that time, I actually thought I'd taken up smoking again. I thought I'd quit smoking and took the medication Champix at the same time, which was actually had a lot of side effects, especially mixed with antidepressants, and I was experiencing suicide ideation, which is a sometimes side effect from taking those two medications together, which wasn't explained to me at the time. by my doctor, and it was through research that I realized, because I was just so confused how I was on this antidepressant, yet I had this extreme hardcore suicide ideation going on, and it didn't make sense to my logical brain when it was present. And as soon as I stopped that medication, it went away. And so, yeah, I have some quite varied lived experience of clinical depression, and the comparison to sad days and hard days and bouts of unhappiness. And, when you're on this path of awakening, there is this illusion that you kind of, once you sort your crap out and you become, some level of awakeness, that you bounce around in bliss all the time, which is an absolute illusion. It's about being able to ride the waves and the storms, and to recognize, the human experience of unhappiness and the human experience of happiness, and how they come and go all the time, and to not be kind of lost in those loops. And this is a thing that, from decades of lived experience and decades long consistent practices of awakening and having realization, and being able to sustain that, and to recognize, that we have low days and we have high days, and to not make either, not to define one better than the other, and to be able to ride the wave of a heavy day, and to recognize that experience as simply that, experience, knowing that everything changes all the time. And the thing that I've recognized in working with, hundreds, thousands of people over the years, is that it's got to do with, understanding the mind. And, even from a neuroscience point of view, it isn't that different to a spiritual mind mastery point of view. It's just different language, different names for the same thing. And how, most people that find themselves feeling unhappy day after day is because they're having the same thoughts about, my life is crap, this job is dumb, I don't like this relationship, woe is me. And there's some version of the same thing being replayed over and over again in the mind, and that makes you unhappy. Gives you a recipe for a heavy day and an unhappiness that is being lived over and over and over again, because of the looping of the mind, just rehashing the same narrative, and the being of the self not actually doing anything to change that, and just, doing the same thing over and over again, wishing for a different result. And, that is not living in awareness, and that is not being proactive in one's lived experience. And it doesn't mean you're depressed. It means that you're lazy, in helping yourself out of allowing the same thoughts to be replayed over and over and over again. I was actually listening to something the other day. I'm right into this whole crossover of neuroscience and spirituality podcasts that I found of late. And there was this guy saying, the common thing that every Nobel Peace Prize winner has had is that they don't think the same thing every day. They're always trying to find something that no one has ever thought of before. And, the way that things are invented is because people think of something that has never been done before in a way that's never been thought of. And that's how we have, had inventions and progressions and all of these things. And so if you get into a disciplined practice of not thinking the same thing every day, you win a Nobel Peace Prize. And, the host was laughing, going, so that's all you have to do. And the guy said, that is the example I'm giving here for this, is that most people are always replaying the same woe or story of their life on repeat, and nothing changes. And it feels heavy, and they call it depression, and it's not. It's just unhappiness. And if you, started thinking of different things you could do, or actually being present with your thoughts and not believing them, because most of them are absolute nonsense. They're just fragments of past thoughts that you're rehashing. And again, most of those are nonsense. And it really is about coming from a place of emotional maturity that doesn't engage in that and allow that to continue. Again, coming from awareness, it's just like, oh, here we go, the loop's back on repeat. I see you, and I'm not going to grasp that thought. I'm not going to go down that thought thread, because I've watched this and I've replayed it a million times, and it's the same result. And that is, feeling what I call depressed, but it was just actually engaging and indulging in unhappiness. And, it's quite a confronting thing to take ownership of. That, we feel sad and bad and crappy that this is our experience, and not realizing that we are ultimately feeding that, and just kind of sitting back in the observer seat for a little bit and observe the thoughts and go, well, I'm going to use my my time here in this thought thread a little differently, and see what I can bring into my mind movie right now that isn't just a rehash of the same thing over and over and over again. And see if that shifts my feelings and emotions and my lived experience, because I assure you it will. And these, are versions of things that I said to people. And it was only kind of after I saw this pattern happening that I really kind of looked at it, at the overuse of the word feeling depressed or depression or, depressive energy, and how the misuse of that word is so widespread. So perhaps that's something that I can invite you is to kind of, when you're having a sad day, which is totally okay, and you're feeling a bit heavy, which is totally okay, or sad or whatever, just, recognize that you're feeling sad, and, it's a heavy day, and not that you're feeling depressed, but that's just the experience you're having right now. You're not actually having a clinical depression episode, because that's a very different thing. So just recognize when you're experiencing happiness and when you're experiencing unhappiness, and when you're experiencing joy, or when you may be experiencing sad, or when you may be experiencing heavy, and you may be experiencing not recognizing I'm just tired, or I need to eat, or I need to drink some water, or I need to rest. Kind of open up your view and realize there's probably many contributing factors to why you're feeling the feeling you're having. And rather than just telling yourself that you're feeling depressed right now, is investigating a little further. Become a little detective. Am I feeling this way because I've got tension in my head because I haven't drank enough water? Or do I need to eat? Or do I need to just take a minute? Or is there a really big, intense thing going on, and feeling this way is absolutely appropriate? And rather than trying to push it away, I will feel the range of emotions and feelings that are appropriate for this moment, because that is the human experience. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today and share with you. Thank you so much for listening. I am so grateful. Please feel free to share this with anyone that you may feel benefit. My website is www.nickstar.com. Much love. Mwah.